translated by Donald Rayfield. Chapter Carpenters. There had been a white mist for days on end. It was so thick that a man became invisible 2 yards away. Not that there was any reason to go far on one's own. The few routes, to the refectory, the hospital, or the guardhouse could be divined by some mysterious instinct, like the capacity for orientation that animals have and that, given the right circumstances, can be activated in human beings. The workmen were not allowed to see a thermometer, and they didn't need one. No matter what the temperature was, they had to go to work. In any case, the old hands could tell almost exactly how many degrees below zero it was. If there was a frosty mist, then it was -40 centigrade outside. If there was a noise when you breathed out but you could still breathe normally, then it was -45. If your breath was noisy and you were out of breath, then it was -50. Below 55 degrees a gob of spit freezes solid in midair. Spit had been freezing in midair for 2 weeks. Potashnikov woke up each morning hoping that the freezing temperatures had abated. After last winter, experience told him that, however cold it was, what you needed to feel warm was a sharp change in temperature, a contrast. Even if the weather got no warmer than -40 or -45, you'd feel warm for a couple of days, and there was no point making any plans for longer than 2 days. But there was no let-up in the cold, and Potashnikov realized that he could not stand it anymore. Breakfast gave him the ability to endure an hour's work at most, and then he was overcome by tiredness and the cold got to his very bones, an idiomatic expression that was literally true. All you could do, so as not to freeze to death by lunchtime, was to wave your pickaxe or spade about and hop from one leg to the other. The hot lunch, the notorious dumpling soup and 2 spoonfuls of porridge, did little to restore your strength, but it did warm you up. Once again, you had the strength to work for an hour, after which Potashnikov was overcome by a desire, if not to get warm, then just to lie down on the sharp edges of the frozen stones and die. But the day still came to an end, and after supper, with a drink of water and a mouthful of bread, which all the workmen took back to the barracks, never eating it with the refectory soup, Potashnikov would immediately lie down to sleep. Naturally, he slept on the top bunk. The lower bunks were like an ice cellar, and those who slept there spent half the night standing by the stove, taking turns to put their arms around it and get the remnants of its warmth. There was never enough firewood. You had to go 4 kilometers after work to fetch wood, and everyone used any excuse they could to get out of this task. It was warmer up on top, although people slept in their work clothes, wearing hats, padded jackets, pea jackets, quilted trousers. It was warmer up on top, but even your hair froze to the pillow in the night. Potashnikov could feel his strength waning every day. He was a man of 30, but he now found it hard to climb to the top bunk and hard to get down. His neighbor had died the day before, just died. He'd failed to wake up, and nobody was curious as to why he had died, as if there was only one reason for dying and everyone knew what it was. The duty orderly was pleased that the death had happened in the morning instead of the evening. He would get the dead man's rations for that day. Everyone understood that, and Potashnikov was bold enough to approach the orderly and say, "Leave a crust for me." But the orderly responded with the violent cursing that can only come from a man who was once weak and is now strong and who knows that he can curse with impunity. A weak man curses a strong man only in extraordinary circumstances, when moved by the boldness of despair. Potashnikov said nothing and retreated. He had to decide to do something, to make his enfeebled brain think up something. Or die. Potashnikov wasn't afraid of death. But he did have a secret passionate desire, a last stubborn resolve, a desire to die somewhere like a hospital, in a bunk or a bed, being attended to, even if only by prison authorities, but not to die outside in the freezing cold or kicked to death by the guards, not in the barracks to the sound of loud quarreling, in filth and surrounded by everyone's indifference. He didn't blame people for being indifferent. He had realized a long time ago what caused this dulling of the spirit, this cold lack of sympathy. The same cold that turned saliva to ice in midair had gotten to the human soul. If your bones could freeze, then your brain could freeze into insensitivity, and so could your soul. You couldn't think about anything in the freezing cold. Everything was simple. A cold, hungry brain couldn't take in nutrition, the brain cells withered. This was clearly a physical process, and God knew if the pathosis could ever be reversed, as a medical man would put it, like frostbite, or if the destruction was permanent. That was what happened to the soul. It froze, it shrank, and, maybe, it would stay cold forever. All this had occurred to Potashnikov before, and now all that was left was a desire to endure, to outlive the spell of freezing cold. Of course, the first thing was to find some means of salvation. There were few such means. You could become a foreman or a guard, just hang around the bosses. Or around the kitchen. But there were hundreds competing for the kitchen, and Potashnikov had refused a year ago to be a foreman, because he had promised himself that he would not allow himself to enslave another human being here. Even if his own life was at stake, he refused to have his dying comrades hurl their last curses in his face. Potashnikov was expecting death any day now, and the day appeared to have come. He gulped down a bowl of warm soup and chewed the last lump of bread, then, barely able to drag his feet, went to his workplace. The brigade was lined up for the start of work. A fat, red-faced man in a reindeer skin hat, reindeer skin boots, and a white fur jacket walked up and down the line. He surveyed the workmen's emaciated, filthy, expressionless faces. The men were shuffling their feet, waiting for this unexpected delay to be over. The foreman was there too, respectfully reporting something to the man in the reindeer skin hat. "I promise you, sir, I don't have anyone like that. You should go and see Sobolev and the non-political convicts. These people are the educated ones, sir, and they're nothing but trouble." The man in the reindeer skin hat, Alexander Evgeniyevich, stopped examining the workman and turned to the foreman. "You foremen don't know your men, you don't want to know them and don't want to help us," he said hoarsely. "Whatever you say, sir. I'll show you what's what." "What's your name?" "Ivanov, sir." "Now watch me. Hey, men, pay attention." The man in the reindeer skin hat addressed the brigade. "The administration needs carpenters to make boxes for carrying earth." There was no response. "You see, sir," whispered the foreman. Potashnikov suddenly heard his own voice. "Yes, sir, I'm a carpenter." He took a step forward. Another man silently took a step from the right flank. Potashnikov knew him, Grigoriev. "Well," said the man in the reindeer skin hat, turning to the foreman, "you're a useless piece of shit. You two, follow me." Potashnikov and Grigoriev staggered after the man in the reindeer skin hat, who halted. "If that's how we're walking," he rasped, "we won't arrive until dinner time. I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead, and you go straight to the carpentry shop and see the construction man, SJF. Do you know where the carpentry shop is? We do, Grigory shouted. Could you let us have a cigarette, please? I was expecting that, murmured the man in the reindeer skin hat, gritting his teeth. Without taking the pack from his pocket, he pulled out 2 cigarettes. Potashnikov walked in front, thinking hard. Today he would spend in the warm carpentry shop and sharpen an axe and make an axe handle. And sharpen a saw, too. There would be no hurry. They would get their tools by dinner, order things, and find the store man. And by evening, when it was discovered that he didn't know how to make an axe handle or to set a saw, he'd be thrown out and be back in his brigade the next day. But today he'd be warm. It was even possible that he could pass as a carpenter tomorrow and the day after, as long as Grigoryf was a carpenter. He would be Grigoryf's apprentice. Winter was coming to an end. Summer was short, so he might somehow get through it. Potashnikov stopped, to allow Grigoryf to catch up. Can you do this? Carpentry stuff? He managed to say, panting with sudden hope. You know, said Grigoryf cheerfully, I have a postgraduate degree from the Moscow Institute of Philology. I think that anyone with higher education, especially in the humanities, ought to be able to carve an axe handle and set a saw, especially if this is to be done next to a hot stove. So, you aren't either. That doesn't matter. We can fool them for a couple of days, and then, who cares what happens then? The 2 of them barely had the strength to open the door, which had frozen shut. A red-hot iron stove was burning in the middle of the carpentry shop, and 5 carpenters, without jackets or hats, were bent over their workbenches. The 2 new arrivals kneeled in front of the stove's open door, worshipping the god of fire, one of humanity's first gods. They took off their gloves and held out their hands to the heat, almost shoving them into the fire. Their fingers, so often frostbitten, had lost their sensitivity and took time to feel the heat. After a minute, Grigoryf and Potashnikov took off their hats and undid their pea jackets but remained kneeling. What are you here for? The carpenter asked them in an unwelcoming tone. We're carpenters. We're going to be working here, said Grigoryf. It's on Alexandrevna's orders, Potashnikov hastily explained. So the construction engineer meant you when he said we were to hand out axes, said Arnström, an elderly toolman, who was in the corner, planing spade handles. It was us. Here you are, Arnström told them, after giving them a mistrustful look. 2 axes, a saw, and a saw-setting tool. Give me back the setting tool when you've finished. Here's my axe, make me a new handle for it. Arnström smiled. My norm for axe handles is 30 per day, he said. Grigoryf took a block of wood from Arnström and started carving. The dinner siren sounded. Still in his indoor clothes, Arnström watched Grigoryf at work and said not a word. Now you, he told Potashnikov. Potashnikov placed a log on the chopping block, picked up the axe, and started hacking. That's enough, said Arnström. The carpenters had gone to dinner, and the 3 of them were alone in the shop. Take these 2 axe handles I've made, said Arnström, handing 2 finished handles to Grigoryf, and fit the axe heads to them. Sharpen the saw. You can warm yourselves by the stove today and tomorrow. The day after tomorrow go back where you came from. Here's a piece of bread for your dinner. That day and the next they warmed themselves by the stove, The following day the freezing cold suddenly let up. It was now only -30, and winter was coming to an end.